The public thought Queen Elizabeth took her final secrets to the grave. But behind chapel doors and sealed folders, one man was left holding words that were never meant for headlines. Now the Archbishop has stepped forward carefully, deliberately, and the entire monarchy feels it. Because what he's hinting at isn't a gentle blessing, it's a warning. A future the Queen demanded, a future the palace resisted, and a line that could split the royal family in two. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It begins, not with a scandal splashed across front pages, but with something far more unsettling silence that suddenly breaks. The Archbishop does not arrive like a sensationalist. He arrives like a man who has been carrying weight for far too long, choosing every word as if each syllable could trigger a collapse. And that's what makes the moment so chilling. He isn't leaking something for attention. He's releasing it like a responsibility he can no longer bear alone. The way he speaks, measured, solemn, almost mournful, suggests he's not merely remembering the Queen. He's obeying her. Because in those final weeks when the nation believed the palace was focused only on comfort and farewell, there was another conversation happening beneath the surface. A private meeting framed as spiritual counsel, the kind of quiet exchange the public would expect from a monarch approaching the end. But what starts as reflection turns sharp, almost surgical, as the Queen's mind moves from legacy to survival. Not her personal legacy, something larger, the monarchy itself. The Archbishop's role shifts from pastoral support to witness, and the atmosphere changes from tender to tense. He is no longer hearing a dying woman's thoughts. He is hearing a sovereign's final instructions. And the most dangerous part isn't that she left wishes. It's that she left them in two forms, one personal, one formal. A heartfelt letter, soft enough to sound like love, written as though she's speaking to the family she raised. And then a second piece harder, cleaner, colder, structured like an instruction that cannot be argued with. One version could be cherished, the other version could be enforced. The difference matters, because it reveals something the palace does not want the public to consider. The Queen anticipated resistance. She anticipated denial. She prepared for a future where her own family might try to reinterpret her final words into something safer, something more convenient, something that doesn't demand sacrifice. That's where the fear begins to pulse through the corridors. The palace expected mourning, somber unity, gentle tributes, a clean transfer of stability. Instead, they're confronted with meaning, because meaning is uncontrollable. Meaning turns private grief into public pressure. Meaning turns the Queen's memory into a standard everyone must either meet or fail. And when the Archbishop speaks, even without naming names, his tone suggests the Queen's last wish wasn't about comfort, it was about control and survival. It was about preventing something she saw coming, an internal fracture, a slow unraveling, a future that would be decided not by duty, but by ego, not by discipline, but by personal agendas. Now the Archbishop is trapped in the most brutal dilemma a man like him can face. Loyalty to the crown has always meant discretion, but duty to truth and conscience has always meant courage. If he stays silent, he protects the institution in the short term, but betrays the Queen's final trust. If he speaks plainly, he honours her but risks igniting the very crisis she feared. And the closer he gets to clarity, the more it feels like the monarchy isn't bracing for a storm outside its walls. It's bracing for the storm that might finally be acknowledged within them. And as the Archbishop's words ripple outward, one question poisons every corridor of power: who has already read the Queen's final wishes, and who is terrified they'll become public. They called it a private blessing. But the Archbishop didn't describe it like a blessing, he described it like a boundary. Like a line drawn in ink at the very end of a reign. Because the Queen's final wishes weren't just about tradition, they were about preventing collapse. And the terrifying part isn't what she asked for, It's why she believed she had to ask at all. Something was coming, something she wanted stopped. What makes this different is the emotion underneath it. Not the kind the palace performs for cameras. The real kind. The kind that stays locked behind composure until the very last moment, and then leaks out in carefully chosen words. The Archbishop's tone carries that same weight, like he is still hearing her voice, still feeling the seriousness of what she placed in his hands. And if you listen closely to what he's implying, it becomes clear the Queen's greatest fear was never the tabloids, never the noise, never the scandal of the week. Her fear was fracture. A monarchy splitting from the inside, quietly at first, then violently, until the public could feel it and the institution couldn't hide it anymore. That's why her future plan wasn't sentimental. It wasn't just a list of hopes. It was a structure, 3 pillars that sound simple until you realize what they demand. Legitimacy, not inherited, but defended. Discipline, not claimed, but proven. And a new public moral contract, which is the most dangerous phrase of all, because it suggests the old one no longer holds. It implies a truth the palace rarely admits. People will tolerate tradition, but only as long as it feels deserved. The Queen understood that. She could sense the world changing. She could sense patience thinning. And she wasn't going to leave the monarchy drifting, hoping the storm would pass. Somewhere inside those final instructions, there's a phrase that keeps surfacing, quietly like a warning echoing through sacred walls. No half measures, no weak hands. It doesn't sound like comfort. It sounds like command. It sounds like the Queen, at the end, refusing to let softness become a liability. And it raises the most uncomfortable question. Who was she thinking of when she said weak hands? Because the moment a monarch uses language like that, you're no longer talking about generic duty. You're talking about people. About capability. About trust or the lack of it. The Archbishop hints at something even more delicate. Her wishes included limitations placed on certain royals. Not punishments, not public humiliations, but restrictions disguised as dignified transitions. Words designed to look graceful while quietly closing doors. The kind of measures that don't create a scandal on day one, but reshape the balance of power over months and years. That's where the dread creeps in. Because if the Queen felt forced to write restrictions into her final wishes, then she believed a risk existed inside the family itself. Not an outsider. Not a political enemy. A risk with a title, a history, a seat at the table. And this is where the emotional undertone becomes almost unbearable. Because it's not cold hatred driving her, it's grief. The type that comes from loving people you cannot fully trust. The type that comes from realizing devotion doesn't guarantee loyalty, and affection doesn't guarantee good judgment. She loved them, but not equally. She believed in them, but not blindly. And in her final weeks, she chose something brutal over something comfortable. She chose safeguarding the institution over protecting fragile egos. The consequences of that choice are immediate, even without a crown being moved. Because wishes like these create winners and losers in a heartbeat. Not officially, not on paper the way the public can track, but in the private reality of who is empowered, who is limited, who is quietly pushed forward, and who is quietly held back. And once those lines are drawn, resentment follows, suspicion follows, fear follows. The palace doesn't need a headline to feel the shift. It only needs the knowledge that the Queen's final words weren't neutral, they were targeted. But the Queen didn't just leave wishes, she left a mechanism, and when the Archbishop reveals who was meant to activate it, the tension turns personal. Everyone assumes the monarchy moves forward by blood. But the Queen's final wishes suggest something far more dangerous. She wanted the future protected by guardians, not just heirs. And when the Archbishop speaks about duty beyond birthright, it lands like a quiet accusation. Because if she appointed guardians, it means she believed someone close could derail everything. Someone she couldn't correct in life, so she tried to contain them in death. What happens next isn't announced with trumpets or ceremony. It happens in tight circles, in controlled conversations, in the kind of private language the palace uses when it's terrified of its own reflection. The Queen's trusted circle emerges not as a comforting support system, but as a firewall, small, disciplined, unshakable, built to keep the institution from burning down when emotion turns into chaos. The Archbishop doesn't describe it as favoritism. He describes it as necessity. And that single shift changes the atmosphere completely, because necessity implies danger. It implies someone inside the family was considered capable of pulling everything off course. There was, he suggests, a private spiritual directive placed quietly at the heart of the plan. Those with influence must serve unity, not ego. Simple words. Brutal implication, because the moment you have to say that out loud, it means ego has already been winning in rooms the public will never see. And once the Queen attached that principle to her final wishes, it stopped being advice. It became a standard, a test. And like all tests in royal life, it instantly separated people into categories: those who would accept limits and those who would fight them. That is where the guardian role becomes combustible. Guardians do not just protect, they oversee, they correct, they block. And if guardians exist, then someone was never meant to have free rein again. It challenges the usual hierarchy and triggers resentment in the most dangerous way, quietly. Senior figures feel judged, as if the Queen's last breath carried a verdict on their judgment. Younger figures feel trapped, realizing their futures are being shaped by expectations they never asked for. Everyone begins to wonder who was trusted, who was doubted, and why the Queen felt forced to design a system that could override personal bonds with institutional discipline. And then grief collides with reality. Because grief can unite a family, but power always finds a way to divide it again. The Queen's final wishes weren't received like sacred guidance. They were received like a threat. Behind the curtains, the palace doesn't argue whether she meant it, they argue whether they can survive it. A crisis meeting forms with the energy of a storm trapped indoors. Words like interpretation and timing get tossed around, but everyone understands what they really mean. Resistance. Delay. Softening. Containment. The Archbishop becomes the moral witness in a room full of calculation. He is pressured subtly at first to reduce the wishes to personal comfort, to frame them as emotional rather than operational, to keep them from becoming the blueprint they were intended to be. But the more he insists that a promise was made, the colder the room becomes, because the most powerful people there suddenly realize something chilling. They might already be breaking it. One voice finally says what others only imply, calls the wishes unrealistic, and the air turns sharp. Not because the word is insulting, but because it reveals the real plan: to mourn the Queen publicly while quietly ignoring the parts of her legacy that demand sacrifice. That is when the Archbishop draws his line, and it hits like a slap delivered in perfect calm. You cannot mourn her and ignore her in the same breath. No shouting, no theatrics, just truth, placed directly in front of people who have spent their lives avoiding it. And in that moment, the palace understands the danger isn't the public finding out. The danger is the Queen's final wishes working exactly as intended, exposing who will submit to duty and who will refuse to be managed by a dead Queen's instructions. And just when the palace thinks it can contain the damage, the Archbishop hints at the one detail that can't be buried: the Queen predicted this resistance and planned for it. This is where the story stops being emotional and starts becoming explosive. Because the Queen didn't just leave wishes, she left consequences, are sealed if they refuse instruction. And when the Archbishop mentions it, even carefully, it feels like the floor shifts beneath the monarchy. Because a clause like that only exists for one reason: she expected betrayal. She expected stalling. She expected someone would try to rewrite her final words, so she wrote a final trap. The palace tries to keep its breathing steady when that idea enters the room. A failsafe. A mechanism, not symbolic, not sentimental operational. The kind of thing you do not draft unless you believe you'll be ignored. And suddenly the Queen's final message takes on a darker shape. She didn't just hope her family would do the right thing. She prepared for the possibility that they wouldn't. The Archbishop's voice carries an edge now. Not anger, but certainty, as if he's describing a vow that was signed in silence and then immediately tested by temptation. He doesn't call it punishment, he calls it protection. A moral safeguard and an institutional firewall, designed to stop the monarchy from drifting into the kind of internal collapse the Queen feared more than any public scandal. Because the haunting implication is this: her final wish included a timeline, not just ideas. A window in which the Crown must act decisively, visibly, without the usual delays that bury difficult truths under endless discussions. That's why fear spreads so quickly. If the public ever learns the palace defied her final instructions, it won't just be embarrassing. It becomes a legitimacy crisis. It becomes a question that cannot be laughed off. If they can ignore the Queen's final command, what else can they ignore? What does duty even mean when the institution starts treating the very woman who embodied it as optional? And that's the emotional twist, the one that stings, because it changes how you see her final days. This wasn't weakness. This wasn't a fading monarch clinging to nostalgia. It was checkmate, a final act of control from a woman who understood power better than anyone around her and who refused to leave the future at the mercy of fragile egos. The irony is brutal. The Queen's last move wasn't to soften hearts, but to force clarity. Obey, and risk damaging personal relationships. Ignore, and risk damaging the throne itself. Either path costs something. Either path exposes someone. And the reason the palace looks so cornered isn't because the clause exists, it's because it works. Then the story widens, becoming even more dangerous. Because the Queen's final wishes weren't sentimental, they were structural. A demand to rebuild the monarchy before the world forces it to break. The Archbishop's words make it clear she wanted a future that looks nothing like the past. Cleaner, harder, less indulgent, more accountable. Not because she suddenly became modern for the sake of image, but because she could feel the public's patience thinning, feel the weight of every private mistake pressing harder against the Crown. She wanted stability through discipline, and discipline through sacrifices, real ones, not polite gestures dressed up as reform. And that's where the new contract comes in: less secrecy, fewer side battles, clearer lines of duty. It sounds noble until you realize what it threatens. Royals who crave privacy hear accountability and feel exposed. Those who thrive on ambiguity hear clear lines and feel trapped. The Archbishop frames it as moral renewal, but the palace hears it as confession, because a monarchy that reforms publicly must first admit it has something to fix. And once that admission begins, there's no controlling where it ends. A wedge forms instantly: modernization versus silence, courage versus comfort, future versus familiarity. Some want to move forward before the world pushes them. Others want to bury the Queen's demands under tradition and time. And somewhere in the middle of that war, another chilling layer appears, because the Archbishop's careful pauses suggest someone outside the palace already knows about the clause. Someone who can force it into daylight at the worst possible moment. Which means the countdown isn't just internal anymore, it's external, it's moving. And the real danger isn't the clause itself, it's what it was designed to stop. And when the Archbishop finally hints at that threat, the monarchy's future turns into a countdown. The palace can survive rumours. It can survive bad press. But it cannot survive the Queen herself naming a threat within her own family. And that's what the Archbishop's tone suggests: careful wording around a single person, a single influence, a single risk she couldn't neutralise while alive. Now that problem becomes a test of whether the monarchy is ruled by love or by responsibility. Because if the Queen asked for containment, It means she believed someone could end the crown from the inside. And this is where the air changes, because the Archbishop refuses to say the name publicly, yet everyone knows the room his words point toward. He doesn't need to name them. He only needs to pause in the wrong place, emphasize the wrong phrase, or speak of influence with the kind of caution that tells you it isn't theoretical. It's personal. It's close. It's lived. The silence around that missing name becomes louder than any confession, because in royal life, the most dangerous truths are the ones everyone recognizes, but no one dares to confirm. What makes it feel like betrayal isn't just the idea that a threat exists. It's the emotional knife twist that comes with it. The Queen's affection clashing with her fear of damage and instability. She wasn't a distant ruler writing cold instructions to strangers. She was a woman who knew every heartbeat of that family, its tenderness, its pride, its rivalries, its fragile vanities, and still, in her final wishes, she drew a boundary. That single act reveals everything. Love did not blind her. Love did not soften her. If anything, love forced her to be harsher, because she understood the greatest danger to the monarchy wouldn't come from outsiders throwing stones. It would come from insiders who believe they are untouchable. Because the problem the Queen wanted contained isn't just scandal, it's influence, entitlement, an uncontrolled narrative that drifts off script and drags the institution with it. It's someone whose presence bends rooms, reshapes conversations, demands exceptions, rewrites expectations. And once you recognize that, you start to see why the palace becomes so frantic the moment the Archbishop begins speaking with moral certainty. If the Queen's final wishes are seen as an accusation, then compliance becomes admission, and denial becomes rebellion against the very monarch they claim to honor. That's when the factions start moving. Quietly, strategically, like chess pieces sliding across velvet. Selective leaks emerge not to reveal the truth, but to control which version of the future survives. One side frames the Queen's wishes as private comfort, hoping to drain them of power. Another side frames them as sacred duty, hoping to weaponize them into obedience. People who stood together during mourning suddenly stand apart in private. Grief becomes a mask for calculation, and calculation becomes the real fight. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the Archbishop is pushed toward a corner he never asked for, because he isn't merely a witness anymore. He is the gatekeeper. A private confrontation is hinted, and it feels almost inevitable. A senior royal, someone used to being obeyed, demands the Archbishop stay in his lane. Not with rage, but with that chilling certainty of authority that expects compliance as a reflex. The implication is clear. Speak about prayer, speak about comfort, speak about unity, but do not speak about control. Do not speak about limits. Do not speak about what the Queen actually wanted, because if the public hears it, the palace loses the ability to manage the fallout quietly. The Archbishop hears the threat beneath the politeness. Protect us, or you will become the problem. And that is the moment that decides everything. Not a coronation, not an election, not a scandal headline. A choice made quietly by the Archbishop about whether the Queen's final wishes remain a sacred private truth, or become the public standard that reshapes the monarchy forever. Because once he speaks plainly, the palace can no longer pretend. They'll have to comply, deny, or retaliate. And any of those options could trigger the crisis she feared most. He frames her wishes as more than guidance. He frames them as a vow the institution owes its own history and unpaid debt to duty itself. And suddenly grief becomes fuel. The Queen's last act becomes a demand for courage, not comfort. The palace faces three outcomes, and none of them are clean. Obey and fracture relationships behind the gates, deny and fracture legitimacy in front of the world, or delay and fracture public trust until the crown feels hollow. And then comes the cruelest truth of all: the Queen's future was conditional. Unity must be earned, not inherited. Loyalty must be proven, not assumed. The monarchy, in her final calculus, could no longer survive on tradition alone. Then the Archbishop drops the twist like a stone into still water. The Queen left one message meant for the public when the time is right. Not a soft farewell. A final standard. A final line that forces the monarchy to either rise to her expectations or reveal that it cannot. And as his voice steadies, as his choice becomes irreversible, the room realizes the right time may have arrived, and the monarchy is not ready. Because as the Archbishop steps toward the microphone, the monarchy realizes the Queen's reign didn't end with her final breath, it ended with her final instruction, and the storm it was designed to unleash. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.